What would you do if the seat you rightfully paid for, the one written clearly on your boarding pass, was stripped from you in front of an entire first-class cabin? What if the flight attendant crumpled your proof into a ball, handing your dignity to another man simply because of who he was, or who he thought he was on this flight? The cabin glowed with golden light and whispered with luxury, but beneath the surface ran something far darker. A powerful investor walked in, dripping arrogance, convinced the world belonged to him. A crew bowed to his name, not the rules, and a black CEO, calm and steady, was told he did not belong. But sometimes silence is sharper than shouting. Sometimes composure is the storm no one sees coming. Tonight, passengers would witness arrogance crumble, justice arrive at 30,000 feet, and a lesson that would ripple far beyond a single seat. So stay with us, because this is not just about a man and a boarding pass. This is about respect, power, and the moment the world was forced to listen, like, share, and subscribe to join us as we begin this unforgettable story. The cabin of Aurora Air Flight 918 felt like a sanctuary suspended above the noise of the world. Golden light flowed from the overhead sconces, softening every corner of the first-class section. The leather seats gleamed in cream, stitched so carefully that even their seams whispered of order. Polished wooden panels reflected faint glimmers from the aisle lamps. The faint aroma of roasted Arabica and sandalwood lingered in the air, as though the cabin itself had been perfumed for serenity. It was here, in seat 1A, that Dr. Marcus Ellison sat in silence. He did not look like a man seeking attention. He was the kind of presence that drew notice precisely because he did not demand it. His navy suit fit without a wrinkle, his tie knotted neatly, his glasses catching small flashes of light from the tablet resting in his hands. On the screen, graphs and numbers scrolled an orchestra of systems he himself had designed, a digital symphony of efficiency and order. Marcus was 50 years old, a black American who had built his company, Nova Systems, from a rented office with nothing but a laptop and sleepless ambition. Now, Nova powered entire data networks for cities across the country. But Marcus had long since learned that true power was not in the size of the empire one commanded, but in how one carried oneself when that empire was challenged. He sat upright, shoulders steady, posture straight, not stiff, but dignified. His silence was a presence stronger than words. Passengers entering the cabin glanced at him without knowing why. Perhaps it was the way his calm seemed to radiate through the noise of rolling suitcases and chatter. Perhaps it was because dignity, when embodied so completely, cannot be ignored. Across the aisle, a young law student named Sophia Tran settled into 3A. She tucked her phone into her lap, opened a notebook, and tried not to stare too obviously at the man in 1A. She had seen his face in magazines. She knew who he was, but it wasn't recognition that made her watch him. It was the strange gravity of his stillness. At 2D, Charlotte Vance adjusted her silk scarf and lifted a glass of water. 52 years old, with silver hair pinned neatly at her nape. Charlotte radiated an aura of command. She was the manager of a multi-billion-dollar investment fund, and she carried herself with the velvet-wrapped sharpness of someone used to watching empires rise and fall with the flick of her pen. Her eyes drifted toward Marcus, studying, calculating. She did not smile. She rarely did when observing potential shifts in power. Further down the cabin, Chief Flight Attendant Nadia Collins moved with polished precision. Her navy uniform was crisp, her dark hair pulled into a bun, her voice warm as she welcomed passengers. She smiled easily, her tone perfectly measured, her posture rehearsed. Yet beneath the polished exterior Nadia often carried a weight and invisible pressure that came from knowing her career hung on her ability to appease those who thought themselves above the rules. The cabin seemed to breathe in rhythm. The wheels beneath the plane hummed softly as the aircraft taxied. And outside, the twilight glow of San Francisco washed the runway in copper and rose. Inside, it was as though time itself had slowed, creating a bubble where order reigned supreme. Marcus closed his tablet for a moment and leaned back into the seat. The soft leather pressed gently against his shoulders. He exhaled slowly, outwardly. He appeared relaxed. Inwardly, his thoughts moved like currents beneath a still lake. He thought of the meetings that had shaped his life. He remembered the way voices in certain boardrooms had wrapped polite words around pointed doubts. "Are you sure you're the right fit to lead this project? Perhaps your style doesn't align with the culture we envision." Always polite, always wrapped in silk, yet always cutting the same way. He remembered shaking hands after saving contracts that protected thousands of jobs, only to notice the quiet hesitation in the eyes of those who still weighed his worth against a prejudice they would never admit aloud. And he thought, even here, in this cabin, where every detail promised equality of luxury, dignity was still something one had to defend. Marcus adjusted his glasses, his expression unchanged. He had no intention of causing scenes, but he knew something most people did not silence was not surrender. It was strategy. He felt the weight of his phone in his pocket, the secure messaging app resting behind its screen. He had designed contingency after contingency for his company, and he had learned to extend that same precision into his personal life. One word, one signal, could move levers far greater than anger ever could. For now, though, there was no need. The cabin remained calm, almost reverent. Nadia passed by, offering smiles and asking if passengers were comfortable. Charlotte set her glass down and folded her hands neatly. Sophia bent her head toward her notes, though her eyes kept flickering to Marcus when she thought no one noticed. It was a tableau of order, of civility, of silence. Yet beneath it, like the faint rumble of thunder far beyond the horizon, something restless stirred. Marcus felt it without knowing its shape. The air was too still, the calm too golden. He closed his eyes for a moment and thought of his father's words from decades ago. "Never fear silence, son. Let them think you are still. Still water cuts deeper than a roaring wave." He smiled faintly, a private smile. He did not know yet what test awaited him, but he knew the silence he carried was not emptiness. It was a blade, sheathed but sharp, waiting for the moment it was needed. The seatbelt signs chimed overhead. The aircraft tilted slightly as it turned toward the runway. Engines hummed louder, steady, measured, a heartbeat of steel and fire. The cabin lights dimmed just a touch. Passengers settled, straps clicking into place. In seat 1A. Marcus Ellison straightened his back, eyes fixed forward. Outside the window, the runway light stretched into the dark, leading to a sky full of unknowns. Inside, the cabin radiated calm, but in that calm, the first crack had already formed. The aircraft had reached a steady rhythm. Passengers leaned back, attendants checked belts, and for a brief moment, it felt as though nothing could disturb the balance. Then the cabin door opened once more. A figure stepped inside with a presence that did not match the serenity of the room. Victor Langford filled the aisle with his shoulders and with his arrogance. He was in his late 50s, broad-shouldered, still carrying the frame of a man who had once played rugby at an Ivy League school, but had long since replaced discipline with indulgence. His suit was dark gray, expensive but poorly worn, as if money had done all the work while respect had been forgotten. The faint smell of wine followed him, the kind of rich Cabernet that lingers even after the glass is empty. Victor did not look around to admire the cabin. He did not nod at the attendants who smiled automatically, nor acknowledge the other passengers already seated. He moved as though every inch of the aircraft belonged to him. To Victor, it was not a plane. It was his private theater. His eyes landed on seat 1A, the front left corner of the cabin, where Marcus Ellison sat with quiet composure. For a moment, Victor's brow furrowed as if something were out of place, like finding a stranger at his dining table. Then his lips curved into a smirk. "That's my seat," he said, voice cutting through the low hum of engines. The words were plain, but they sliced the golden calm of the cabin in two. Conversations halted. Forks hovered above plates. Even the background clinking of glasses seemed to pause mid-note. Marcus lifted his gaze from his tablet. His expression did not change. His dark eyes were steady, reflecting none of the insult, but carrying a weight that unsettled those watching. Slowly, deliberately, he set his tablet down on the armrest. His hand reached into the breast pocket of his jacket and withdrew the neatly folded boarding pass. Without a word, he extended it toward Victor. "Marcus Ellison," he said softly. "Seat 1A." The paper was crisp, the black letters clear against the white. It should have ended there. A man shows his pass. The seat is confirmed. The matter is resolved. But in this cabin, order was already fragile. Chief Flight Attendant Nadia Collins appeared at Victor's side, her smile tense, her palms already damp with nervous sweat. She had dealt with difficult passengers before. She had soothed tempers, quieted arguments, and smoothed over egos. But Victor Langford was not just any passenger. He was an investor in Aurora Air, a man who carried influence like a weapon, a man whose name could call meetings that ended careers. Victor did not even glance at the boarding pass. His smirk widened, his voice dipped lower, confident that everyone in the cabin was listening. "I have sat in this seat for years," he declared, raising his chin. "This is mine. Always has been. Always will be." A murmur stirred among the passengers. Charlotte Vance in 2D tilted her head, watching closely. Her eyes glinted with curiosity, like a hawk observing prey but waiting for the right moment to strike. Sophia Tran in 3EO looked up from her notes, her lips parting in disbelief. She could already feel the weight of injustice pressing into the air. Marcus's reply was calm, even without the tremor of anger. "Regulations don't account for familiarity, sir. They account for boarding passes." The words hung in the air, measured and quiet, but they carried more strength than volume could have offered. Nadia's chest tightened. Her eyes flicked from the crisp pass in her hand to Victor's expectant glare. She heard her own thoughts racing. "Do not stir the storm. Nadia, if you cross him, complaints will follow. Meetings in closed rooms. A career ended with a single phone call." Her pulse thudded in her ears. And so, when fear outweighed duty, she clenched her hand. The crisp paper bent beneath her fingers. The cabin watched, holding its breath. Then the sound came slow, rough, final. The rasp of paper collapsing into a knot. The boarding pass had been crushed. The noise carried like a slap across the room. Sophia gasped softly. A man in 1C cleared his throat, shifting uncomfortably. Charlotte Vance set her glass down on the tray table, her eyes narrowing, her expression smooth, but her gaze sharpened like steel. Victor's smirk grew into a grin. He spread his arms slightly, basking in the silence that followed. You see, 1A is mine, he said, his voice dripping with satisfaction. Marcus did not move for a long moment. He looked at the crumpled paper in Nadia's hand, as though it were a mirror reflecting years of prejudice wrapped in civility. The ache was not in the paper, but in the symbol, in the way a lifetime of battles could be compressed into a single, careless gesture. He inhaled once, steady. His heartbeat did not quicken. Anger did not flash. Instead, he chose composure. He nodded once, clipped and calm. "I'll take 4C, he said. And with that, he rose. His steps across the carpet were deliberate, unhurried, almost regal in their stillness. Whispers rippled through the rows as eyes followed him. Nadia felt a fleeting moment of relief, as though she had avoided disaster. But the weight of guilt pressed heavier, for she knew she had pushed a man away from justice. Marcus lowered himself into seat 4C, slid his tablet aside, and sat tall. Outwardly, his expression did not shift. But within memory surfaced boardrooms filled with skeptical glances, contracts where his signature had saved livelihoods, yet his worth still questioned. He had endured countless moments like this. History was not only written in books, he thought. It lived in the way a boarding pass could be crushed. Victor leaned back in 1A as if reclaiming a throne. He gestured for champagne, his smile hollow as glass. Back to the way it should be. He muttered loudly enough for 3 seats nearby to hear. Nadia passed by Marcus's new seat. Her smile remained fixed, but sweat dampened her palms. Inside her mind, a small voice whispered, "I was wrong." A louder voice countered, "Do not make this complicated." Charlotte's gaze shifted between the two men. She recognized 2 truths, Victor's crude arrogance and Marcus's unshakable composure. She knew the value of such calm. It was rare, born only of those who understood that power does not need to shout. And she also knew there were levers buried deep in the system. Touch the right one, and the entire structure would tremble. At 4C, Marcus opened his phone. His thumb hovered above a single contact in a secure messaging app. The cursor blinked, waiting like a live wire ready to close the circuit. His inner voice weighed the options. Was this the moment? Should he let arrogance reign unchecked, or would patience prove yet again to be mistaken for weakness? He typed one word, "Now." He pressed send. Then he shut the phone and placed it aside. His eyes fixed on the silent space between 1A and 4C. The cabin resumed its usual sounds, glasses clinking, forks against porcelain, the measured steps of attendants. Yet for a few who paid attention, the air felt different. It was as if the pressure had dropped, as if a storm was gathering unseen. Victor raised his glass, savoring his false victory, unaware that the ground beneath him had already begun to shift. Nadia adjusted a tablecloth, oblivious to the wave turning against her. Sophia Tran glanced again at Marcus, sensing something she could not yet name. The man stripped of his seat did not rage, did not shout. He sat tall, breathing evenly, as if measuring the speed of a storm still distant. And though the first-class cabin appeared calm, the game had just changed. The hum of the engines filled the silence left behind after the crumpled pass. First class returned to its golden glow, but it was no longer serene. The air carried a heaviness that pressed on every chest, an invisible reminder of what had just happened. Marcus Ellison sat in seat 4C. The leather was soft, the legroom ample, the glass on the tray table polished. Yet the seat felt foreign. It was not 1A. It was not what he had been promised, not what he had earned. The difference between 4 rows seemed small, but it carried the weight of history. He folded his hands on his lap and breathed slowly, outwardly. Nothing about him suggested turmoil. His shoulders were relaxed, his chin steady, his expression composed. But within, his mind turned like storm clouds gathering across a still lake. Was silence the right choice? The question pulsed through him with every heartbeat. He thought of the countless times in his life when silence had been mistaken for weakness, the meetings where colleagues had spoken over him, assuming his quiet meant agreement, the conferences where his contributions were overlooked until repeated by someone else, the negotiations where his calm patience had been spun as lack of fire. But he also remembered the victories born from silence, deals secured not by shouting but by measured words, partnerships formed not by aggression but by waiting until the other side revealed their hand. He had learned that silence could be a shield, and sometimes it could be a sword. Now, seated in 4C, he wondered which it would become tonight. Victor Langford lounged in 1A like a king restored to a stolen throne. He tapped his fingers against the armrest, his gold watch catching the light. He chuckled under his breath, loud enough for those around him to hear, savoring his triumph. "Back to the way it should be," he murmured again, letting the words carry just far enough to sting. Several passengers shifted in their seats. A man in one seat pretended to focus on the in-flight magazine, though his jaw tightened with discomfort. Sophia Tran in 3A leaned closer to her notebook, but her phone screen glowed faintly. The camera angled discreetly toward the aisle. Charlotte Vance in 2D crossed one leg over the other, her glass of water untouched, her gaze fixed forward with the composure of a woman reading a chessboard. Nadia Collins passed down the aisle, her smile stiff, her voice rehearsed. "Is everything comfortable for you, sir?" she asked Victor, the words polished but hollow. Victor raised his glass of champagne, nodded curtly, and took a long sip. His arrogance filled the space like smoke. Marcus did not react. He rested his eyes on the small screen of his tablet, though his thoughts were elsewhere. He remembered the first time he sat in a boardroom filled with men who questioned whether someone like him could lead. He remembered the tone, the subtle disbelief, the way they measured his worth not by his skills, but by an image they carried in their minds of who belonged and who did not. A memory sharpened in his chest. Years ago, he had been denied a contract despite presenting the strongest proposal. The rejection letter had read, "We've decided to move in a different direction." Later, he learned the truth whispered through hallways. He did not fit the company's image of leadership. He was brilliant, yes, but not the kind of face they wanted in front of clients. Tonight, as he sat in 4C, the echo of that memory returned. A boarding pass crushed into a ball. A seat taken not by right but by entitlement. It was all the same language, spoken differently through time. Marcus's gaze lifted briefly toward Victor. The man was laughing now, chatting with a fellow passenger about his vineyard and his decades of loyalty to the airline. His voice dripped with false nostalgia, as though his personal history outweighed the rules of every other traveler. Marcus's eyes shifted to Nadia. She moved gracefully, but her hands trembled faintly when she thought no one could see. She knew what she had done. Fear had ruled her choice, and now guilt pressed like a stone against her chest. Marcus could see it in the way she avoided his gaze, in the way she poured wine with too much precision, trying to control the one thing still within her reach. Charlotte Vance observed it all. Her expression revealed nothing, but her mind catalogued every detail. She saw Victor's arrogance, Marcus's composure, Nadia's guilt, and Sophia's subtle rebellion with her phone. She knew the balance of power could shift at any moment. Charlotte had lived her life steering vast fortunes through storms of ego and pride. She recognized this silence for what it was, not surrender, not weakness, a storm waiting for the right signal. Sophia Tron's fingers tightened on her phone. She whispered to the young man beside her. He had the pass. "How can this be?" Her companion tugged her sleeve, whispered back nervously, "Don't get involved. It's not worth it." But Sophia kept her phone steady, pretending to scroll through the news while her camera captured Victor's smug posture and Marcus's stillness. She felt the injustice burning in her chest, and though fear told her to stay quiet, another voice urged her to record. If nothing else, the world deserved to see. Marcus closed his tablet. He reached for the glass of water on the tray table and took a slow sip. His reflection glimmered faintly in the polished surface of the glass. He thought of his father again, of words spoken decades ago in their small home in Atlanta. "Son," his father had said, "the world will test you in ways that feel unbearable, but never give them your anger too quickly. Anger is a gift you must place carefully, or they will use it against you. Choose your silence, and one day it will speak louder than their shouting." Marcus set the glass down. His breathing was steady. His silence pressed on the cabin like a weight. Around him, passengers shifted, glanced, whispered. Some avoided the truth, burying themselves in screens and magazines. Others looked on with unease, torn between fear of confrontation and quiet admiration for the man who refused to bow to humiliation. Victor's laughter rang out again. "Order restored," he said loudly, clinking his glass against the tray table. "Some things never change." Marcus's jaw tightened, though his expression remained calm. His thoughts swirled like currents hidden beneath calm water. Was this silence enough? Would it teach, or would it allow arrogance to reign unchallenged? His hand brushed against his pocket, where his phone rested, the secure app only a few taps away. He knew the weight of that one word already typed. He knew the levers it would pull, the storm it would unleash. But he also knew the cost. If he pressed send too soon, it would look like vengeance, not justice. If he waited too long, the humiliation would deepen. The injustice would solidify. His mind balanced on that edge, calculating like a surgeon before the incision. Charlotte Vance's eyes flickered to him for the briefest moment. Her lips curved in the faintest of smiles, as though she sensed the storm forming. She lifted her glass again, but she did not drink. She was waiting. Sophia Tran kept her phone steady, her heart racing. She felt she was no longer just a witness, but part of something larger, something history would remember. Victor leaned back further, smugness radiating from every gesture. "This seat," he said, his voice carrying like a sermon, "is always mine. Everyone knows it." Marcus inhaled deeply. His silence did not break. His eyes darkened with thought, steady, fathomless, a quiet ocean preparing to unleash its tide. The weight of that silence pressed on the entire cabin. And though no announcement had been made, though no hand had yet moved, those who felt the subtle shift in the air knew the storm was coming. The champagne flute in Victor Langford's hand caught the golden cabin light as though it had been staged. He lifted it high, swirling the liquid lazily before bringing it to his lips. The gesture was not for thirst. It was performance. Every move was an announcement: I've won. I own this place. I belong here above all others. The cabin absorbed the performance like unwilling witnesses at a theater they had not chosen to attend. Some passengers fixed their eyes on screens. pretending to be enthralled by silent news tickers. Others shifted in their seats, glancing quickly toward Marcus Ellison in 4C, then away again, as if ashamed by their own unease. Victor's voice broke the silence. It was not loud in volume, but it carried the sharpness of a knife cutting through linen. "Order restored," he said with a self-satisfied grin. "You see, some traditions cannot be broken. Certain seats are meant for certain people." The words hung in the air like smoke, bitter and unavoidable. Nadia Collins, the chief flight attendant, passed nearby. She forced a smile, though her lips trembled ever so slightly. Her uniform was still flawless, her stride still practiced, but her mind was unraveling with each step. She had made the choice to crush the boarding pass. She had bowed to fear instead of principle. Now the cabin's air felt thicker with every breath she took. When she poured Victor another glass of champagne, her hands nearly betrayed her. The liquid trembled inside the crystal. She steadied herself, placing the glass carefully in front of him. He nodded without looking at her, his eyes already drifting toward Marcus as if savoring the sight of victory. Marcus remained in 4C, unmoving, the embodiment of silence. He leaned slightly back. His fingers interlaced loosely on his lap. His face revealed nothing, but his stillness was not emptiness. It was full, dense, carrying more weight than Victor's noise could ever muster. Charlotte Vance in 2D tilted her head slightly. She had seen this play before, in boardrooms and courtrooms, in negotiations that decided the fate of entire industries. There was always one man who shouted, who banged the table, who wielded arrogance like a blunt weapon. And then there was the other, the one who sat still, who waited, who knew that silence, when timed perfectly, could break walls louder than fists. Her eyes moved between the two men now. Victor's false throne in 1A, Marcus's calm exile in 4C. Charlotte sipped her water and thought to herself, "This is not over." Sophia Tran in 3A felt her chest tighten as she continued to record. She angled her phone carefully, pretending to check social media while the camera captured Victor's smirk, Nadia's nervous hands, and Marcus's quiet resolve. She was young, only 26, but even she could sense the weight of what was unfolding. She whispered softly, "This doesn't feel right." Her companion beside her shook his head nervously. "Don't get involved. People like him," he gestured vaguely toward Marcus, "they'll be fine. They always find a way." Sophia frowned. She knew better. The way Marcus sat, stripped of his rightful seat, told a deeper truth. People like him did not always find a way. They built one, often against walls designed to keep them out. Victor leaned back, gesturing broadly with his champagne. "Back to the way it should be," he repeated. His laugh was hollow, but he filled it with confidence. "This seat has always been mine. I have history with this airline. I helped build its success." He wanted the cabin to hear, and they did. His words spread like oil on water, coating everything with a sheen of entitlement. Nadia moved further down the aisle, her thoughts louder than her footsteps. "What have I done?" she asked herself. The man had the boarding pass. He was calm, respectful, rightful, and yet she had chosen fear. She had chosen the easier path. The thought pressed into her chest like a stone she could not move. She glanced back at Marcus briefly, just long enough to see that he was not looking at her. His gaze was forward, steady, unreadable. That unreadability made her guilt worse. Anger she could have managed. Silence was harder. Marcus's mind was far from the cabin now. His thoughts stretched across years of quiet humiliations. The time a handshake had been denied at a gala. The time a reporter had mistaken him for an assistant rather than the CEO. The time his company had been nearly cut out of a deal until his designs proved indispensable. Each moment was a crumpled boarding pass, each one a reminder that dignity was fragile in the hands of those who saw it as optional. He looked at Victor briefly, then turned his eyes back to the window. Outside, the runway lights were shrinking, replaced by the endless black of sky. He inhaled, slow and deliberate. Silence had always been his choice. It was his inheritance, his weapon, his shield. Tonight, though, the silence felt heavier. He wondered if it would be enough. Charlotte Vance caught that look. The way Marcus's eyes flickered toward Victor and then away. It told her what she needed to know. He was calculating. He was not defeated. She leaned back in her seat, her mind turning like clockwork. She thought of the encrypted system she and Marcus had once helped design in another era, another fight. She wondered if he still had it. Sophia Tran's phone captured Victor raising his glass again. The young woman swallowed hard. She felt her thumb twitch, tempted to stop recording, but she couldn't. Her heart told her this footage might matter. Victor spoke again, louder this time, his voice dripping with mockery. Some people don't understand that in this world. There is order. Some people belong at the front, others don't. That's just the way it is. The word stung. Several passengers frowned, but remained silent. No one dared confront him. The air thickened with cowardice, with complicity, with the weight of injustice tolerated. Marcus closed his eyes briefly. His father's words echoed again. Never let them mistake your silence for surrender. He opened them again, steady, calm, unbroken. Victor's noise filled the cabin, but Marcus's stillness filled it more. Nadia passed by once more, her heart pounding. Her voice trembled as she asked another passenger if they needed anything. She avoided Marcus entirely. She could not bear the quiet judgment she imagined in his stillness. Charlotte watched Nadia carefully. She saw the tremor, the guilt, the crack forming in the polished facade. Fear had driven Nadia to crush the pass, but fear would not protect her from what was coming. Sophia whispered again to her companion. He doesn't even have to say anything. You can feel it. Something's going to happen. Her companion shook his head. Uneasy. Don't be dramatic. But Sophia's eyes stayed on Marcus. She sensed the gravity around him, the way the air bent toward his silence. She was right. Something was coming. Victor leaned forward in his seat, gesturing grandly to no one in particular. "Do you even know who I am?" he said loudly. "I've poured millions into this airline. I've earned this seat. It belongs to me." Marcus did not look at him. He sat still, his silence louder than any retort could have been. The contrast was stark. One man filled the air with noise, flailing in the hollow performance of power. The other sat in silence, his dignity intact, his composure unbroken, his very stillness unsettling those who watched. Noise against stillness, arrogance against composure. The cabin felt the tension, and though no one spoke it aloud, they all knew. The scales were shifting, and silence was winning. The golden calm of the cabin was gone. In its place lingered a heavy stillness, thick as fog, where every word seemed to echo louder than intended. Victor Langford sat in 1A, sipping champagne as if it were a crown jewel. His arrogance radiated across the cabin, an invisible performance meant for everyone within earshot. Yet what unsettled the passengers most was not his noise, but the silence that sat in 4C Marcus Ellison leaned back against the leather seat, his gaze steady, his breathing calm. The weight of his silence pressed on those nearby. He had not argued, had not raised his voice, had not demanded what was rightfully his. Instead, he had chosen composure, and that composure carried more power than any shouted protest. Sophia Tran in 3A could not tear her eyes away. She angled her phone discreetly, pretending to scroll, but the camera recorded everything: Victor's smirk, Nadia's trembling hands, the crushed remains of a boarding pass. She felt her chest tighten with a strange mix of fear and duty. She whispered to herself, almost soundless, "People need to see this." Her companion nudged her elbow. "Stop! Sophia!" "You don't want trouble? Put it away." But she shook her head faintly. "No, this matters." Charlotte Vance in 2D watched with the detached sharpness of a strategist. Her silver hair glimmered under the cabin lights, her eyes calm yet calculating. She had seen many conflicts in boardrooms, had navigated storms of power and pride. But this was different. This was raw, visible, impossible to disguise behind contracts and legal jargon. She noted every detail, storing it like ammunition. Victor leaned forward, raising his voice again, his words polished with contempt. "Order must be respected. Certain places are not meant for everyone. That's the way the world works." A couple in 1C exchanged uneasy glances. The woman pressed her lips together, whispering something too soft to hear. The man shook his head, pretending to immerse himself in the in-flight magazine, his fingers trembling slightly against the paper. Farther back, a young entrepreneur in 5A adjusted his tie nervously. He was no stranger to ambition, but the scene unfolding in front of him stirred something deeper. He wanted to say something, to stand up, but fear anchored him to the seat. His mind replayed the words of his mentor, "Pick your battles wisely." He chose silence, but his eyes betrayed his discomfort. Nadia Collins walked down the aisle again, her heart pounding. Every step reminded her of the choice she had made. She had crushed the pass. She had sided with arrogance over dignity. And now, every glance at Marcus's composed figure reminded her of the truth she had betrayed. She adjusted a napkin, straightened a glass, but nothing steadied her racing thoughts. Why did I do it? She asked herself. The man had shown his pass. He had been calm, respectful, patient, and I crumbled, just like the paper in my hand. She risked a glance toward him. He was not looking at her. That hurt more than if he had. His silence was not empty. It was judgment without words, a mirror reflecting her fear back at her. Sophia's camera caught the moment perfectly, Nadia passing Marcus with her eyes averted, Victor leaning back smugly, Marcus still and unbroken. In that silence, the cabin became a theater. Everyone was an actor, whether they admitted it or not. Victor played the king, Marcus played the exiled rightful heir, Nadia played the trembling hand of compromise, Charlotte played the calculating witness, and Sophia, unknowingly, played the chronicler whose record would one day escape the cabin and ignite the world outside. Victor raised his voice again. Do you even know what this airline owes me? Without my investments, half of you wouldn't be sitting here. I've earned my place in 1A 1,000 times over. The arrogance clanged against the walls, but no one applauded. The passengers sat frozen, unsure where to place their loyalty. Some looked away. Others stared forward, their faces stiff masks of neutrality. But beneath those masks churned unease, even shame. Marcus finally shifted. He lifted his glass of water, took a slow sip, then set it back down with deliberate calm. The motion was small, but it rippled across the cabin like a pebble dropped into a pond. Several pairs of eyes followed the movement. His silence, his restraint, demanded more attention than Victor's noise. Charlotte Vance noticed it instantly. She smiled faintly to herself, though no one saw. She knew this pattern well. The louder one side grew, the more power the quiet side gained. Noise consumed itself. Silence sharpened like a blade. Sophia Tron leaned closer to her companion, whispering, "He doesn't need to say anything. Look at him. He's stronger than all of them." Her companion muttered nervously, "You're imagining it." But she knew she was not. Victor set his glass down with a clink, raising his voice once more. "Respect is not given. It is earned. And I've earned more than anyone else here." Marcus's eyes lifted then, meeting Victor's for the briefest of moments. The gaze was calm, unshaken, but it carried a weight that made Victor falter ever so slightly. He masked it with another laugh, louder this time, but the crack had shown. Nadia caught it too. She felt her stomach twist. Victor was not invincible. He was loud, but not unbreakable. The realization deepened her guilt. She had crushed the wrong man's boarding pass. Charlotte folded her hands neatly on her lap. She thought of the encrypted systems she and Marcus had once helped build years ago. Tools designed for moments exactly like this. She wondered if he still had access, if he had already set something in motion. Sophia's phone vibrated softly with a notification. She ignored it, keeping the camera steady. She whispered again, "This will matter. You'll see." The engines hummed beneath them, steady and unbothered, a mechanical heartbeat that contrasted with the human tension above. Outside, the darkness of the sky stretched endless, dotted with faint stars. Inside, the cabin was its own universe, a stage where silence and noise battled invisibly. Marcus leaned back, closing his eyes for a moment. He remembered his father's words, remembered every humiliation endured, every battle fought with calm. He thought of the one word already typed into his phone, waiting to be sent. He did not move yet. Timing was everything. Victor's voice continued to fill the cabin, but fewer people listened now. His words were loud, but they rang hollow, echoing only against the walls. Marcus's silence, however, filled the air, pressing into every chest, making every breath heavier. The witnesses felt it. The couple in 1C, the young man in 5A, Charlotte Vance in 2D, Sophia Tran in 3A, Nadia Collins with trembling hands. They all felt it, and though none of them spoke aloud, a silent truth grew heavier with every passing second. The man in 4C had not been defeated. The storm had not yet begun. The hum of the engines was steady, but inside the cabin, tension vibrated like a wire pulled to its breaking point. Passengers shifted uneasily in their seats, trapped between silence and noise. Victor Langford filled the air with his voice, every sentence a proclamation of power. "You see," he said with a laugh that dripped with arrogance, "this seat has always been mine. I've built this airline with my investments. Without me, you wouldn't even be flying. Order must be preserved. 1A belongs to me." His words landed like stones thrown into still water. They made ripples, but they could not drown the silence. Marcus Ellison sat in 4C, posture composed, his face calm. But beneath that calm was movement, like tectonic plates shifting beneath the earth. He had endured this performance long enough. His silence had spoken, but noise still reigned unchecked. His hand slid into his pocket. He drew out his phone, its screen glowing softly against the dim light. The secure messaging app opened, its interface clean and stark. At the top of the screen blinked a single word, already typed, already waiting, now. He hesitated. His thumb hovered above the screen. He thought of his father's words. Do not give them your anger too quickly. Choose your silence carefully. Had he waited long enough, or had he waited too long? His heart was steady, but his mind raced. He weighed the passengers around him. Sophia Tran in 3A recording quietly, her eyes bright with indignation. The couple in 1C shrinking into themselves, unwilling to speak but unwilling to applaud either. The young man in 5A leaning forward, restless, his tie slightly askew. Charlotte Vance in 2D, calm as stone, watching every move like a strategist studying a battlefield. Charlotte's eyes flicked briefly toward Marcus. Just a glance, but it was enough. He caught it, a signal, a silent message between two people who understood power. She knew what he was about to do. She had been waiting for it. Victor raised his glass again, letting the champagne catch the light. Some people never learn. He sneered. You can't just buy your way into respect. You have to be born into it. The words cut through the cabin like acid. Several passengers lowered their eyes, ashamed for him yet afraid to show it. Marcus inhaled once, his thumb pressed down. Now. Sent. The message blinked away. He slid the phone back onto the tray table, laced his fingers together, and sat still, his eyes fixed forward, unshaken. He had pulled the trigger. The storm was set in motion. Charlotte's phone buzzed softly in her lap. She lowered her eyes, hiding the faintest curve of a smile. She unlocked it with smooth precision, her long fingers dancing across the encrypted app they had once helped design. A relic from another battle, another reform. She had not expected to use it again. But here it was, alive once more. The message was simple, but its meaning was immense. Protocol Delta. Replace entire crew immediately. Charlotte tapped the confirmation. The faint chime was almost inaudible, but to her it sounded like a drumbeat echoing through the cabin. She placed her phone back into her bag, lifted her glass of water, and took a slow sip. Nadia Collins stood at the front of the cabin, her palms slick with sweat. She could not shake the image of the crumpled boarding pass in her hand. It haunted her like a ghost, following her with every step. She adjusted her uniform, straightened a napkin, forced another smile. None of it helped. Her mind replayed the moment again and again. Marcus showing his pass, calm and respectful. Victor sneering, demanding, and her own hand, trembling with fear, crushing the truth into a ball of paper. She looked at Marcus in 4C, her stomach twisting. He had not yelled, had not argued, had not accused her. His silence was worse. It was a mirror she could not escape. And now she felt something else in the air. A shift, a heaviness that made her chest tighten. She did not know what it was, but she felt it. Sophia Tran's phone continued to record. She glanced at Marcus, then at Charlotte, then back at Marcus. She sensed something had changed, though she could not name it. She whispered to her companion. Did you feel that her companion frowned? Feel what? The air. It's different now. Victor noticed nothing. He leaned back, gesturing with his glass, his voice louder than ever. Respect is a currency, and I've earned more than anyone else in this cabin. Some people should remember their place. His arrogance rolled through the air, but fewer people listened now. Eyes drifted toward Marcus instead, curious, uneasy. drawn to the stillness that sat like a shadow over the noise. Marcus sat tall, eyes steady, breathing calm. He had done his part. The silence was no longer surrender. It was action, sharpened into a blade. Charlotte's gaze flicked briefly toward him again. A silent acknowledgement passed between them. She had activated the signal. The storm was coming. Nadia felt it before anyone else. A vibration in her bones, a weight pressing down on her chest. She smoothed her uniform again, her hands trembling. She forced a smile as she offered a tray of wine to another passenger. But inside, her thoughts screamed. Something is wrong. Something is coming. The young entrepreneur in 5A leaned forward, whispering to himself, "This doesn't feel like an ordinary flight." The couple in 1C exchanged another glance, their faces pale. The woman whispered, "It's like the air changed." Sophia bit her lip, her phone steady in her hands. She had no idea what was unfolding, but she knew she was capturing something important, something that would not remain within the walls of this cabin. Victor chuckled again, lifting his glass in triumph. "The world is simple," he said. "Those who know their place thrive. Those who don't suffer humiliation." The words had barely left his lips when the intercom above crackled softly. A chime sounded, sharp and clear. Nadia froze mid-step. Her heart leapt into her throat. "Attention passengers." The voice of the captain rang out, calm and professional. "Please remain seated. Operational adjustments are in progress. Your cooperation is appreciated." The cabin stirred, heads lifted. Whispers spread like wildfire. Victor frowned, glancing toward the front. Operational adjustments. What nonsense! Is this Marcus's expression did not change. He sat still, calm. His eyes closed for a moment as though in meditation. He exhaled slowly. The first wave had begun. Charlotte lifted her glass, sipping calmly, her eyes glittering with the knowledge of what was to come. Sophia's phone captured it all. Victor's frown, Nadia's trembling hands, Marcus's serene composure. The storm had been unleashed. The cabin was too quiet. The kind of quiet that made people glance at each other, searching for clues in expressions and posture. The captain's announcement still lingered in the air like smoke. Operational adjustments. The phrase was vague, sterile, yet unsettling. Passengers whispered in hushed tones. The couple in 1C leaned close, the woman whispering, "What does that mean?" The man shook his head, his brow furrowed. "I've flown for years. I've never heard it said like that." The young entrepreneur in 5A pulled his phone from his pocket, checking for a signal. There was none. Airplane mode sealed them off from the world. He exhaled sharply, uneasy. Nadia Collins stood frozen near the galley, her palms damp against her uniform. She had worked on hundreds of flights, memorized every protocol, faced turbulence and unruly passengers, even medical emergencies, but never this, never a phrase that seemed to drop the floor out from under the cabin. Her heart pounded as she replayed the crumpled boarding pass in her mind. Was this connected? Had her decision triggered something she could not control? The weight of guilt pressed heavier, until even her uniform collar felt suffocating. Victor Langford shifted in seat 1A, irritation flashing across his face. Operational adjustments, he muttered mockingly. Nonsense. They probably forgot some catering carts. Nothing important. But his laugh sounded forced this time. His hand tightened on the stem of his champagne glass. Charlotte Vance in 2D set her glass down gently. Her face revealed nothing, but her eyes gleamed with the sharpness of someone who knew more than she let on. She could feel it, the balance of power shifting underfoot. Marcus had moved a piece on the board, and now the system was responding. Sophia Tran in 3A pressed record again after briefly pausing. Her heart raced. She whispered to herself, "This is bigger than I thought." Her companion leaned close, whispering harshly, "Stop filming. If they see you." She shook her head. "No, people need to know. Something's happening. All the while." Marcus Ellison sat in 4C, composed as ever. His hands rested lightly on his knees, his gaze fixed forward. To the casual eye, he looked relaxed, almost detached, but his stillness was purposeful. He was listening, feeling, waiting. The trigger had been pulled. Now came the unraveling. The intercom chimed again. A new voice, firm and clear, replaced the captain's. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is a formal notice. By order of the Executive Board, current flight operations are under review. Please remain calm and in your seats as we proceed with crew reassignment." The words landed like a thunderclap. Gas rippled through the cabin. A woman in 2C covered her mouth. The man in 1C muttered, "Crew reassignment mid-flight." "That's impossible." Nadia's knees weakened. "Crew reassignment." Her throat closed with dread. She looked toward her colleagues, their faces pale, eyes wide with disbelief. None of them moved. None of them spoke. Victor slammed his glass onto the tray, the sharp ring cutting through the whispers. "This is outrageous," he barked. "No one replaces a crew mid-flight. I've flown for decades. This isn't how it works." But his voice cracked at the edges, betraying the first hints of fear. Charlotte Vance folded her hands on her lap, her gaze steady. She knew what was unfolding. She had helped build the tools years ago, with Marcus at her side. She could almost hear the gears turning in the background, the silent machinery of power at work. Sophia's camera captured everything: Victor's rising panic, Nadia's trembling hands, passengers' wide eyes, Marcus's unwavering calm. Nadia stumbled a step forward, whispering to herself, "This can't be happening." Her chest burned with guilt. Was this her punishment? Was the universe answering for her cowardice? For the moment she had betrayed the truth in her hand. Victor rose halfway from his seat, his broad frame blocking the aisle. "I demand to speak with the captain," he shouted. "This flight does not proceed until I've had answers." But no answer came. The cockpit door remained shut. The intercom stayed silent. Passengers exchanged glances. Some shrank back into their seats, afraid of confrontation. Others leaned forward, sensing history unraveling before their eyes. Marcus finally moved. He reached for his glass of water, lifted it calmly, and took a measured sip. Then he set it down again, as though nothing unusual had happened. The gesture was subtle, but it spread through the cabin like a wave. His calm was louder than Victor's shouts. Victor glared at him. "You think this is your doing, don't you?" he snapped. "Don't sit there smug. You're just another passenger. You don't command planes. You don't command airlines." Marcus met his gaze for a brief moment. His expression was unreadable, his silence unbroken. Victor clenched his fists. He wanted a fight, wanted an argument, but none came. The silence was unbearable. Nadia turned away, her eyes burning. She had wanted to preserve order, to avoid chaos, but now chaos had come anyway, and it was bigger than she could contain. Charlotte exhaled softly, almost imperceptibly. She tilted her head toward Marcus, a gesture of quiet acknowledgement. He had not needed to move, not needed to shout. The message had been sent, the wheels were turning, and nothing Victor could say would stop it now. Sophia whispered to herself, "He doesn't even need to speak. The world is moving around him." Her camera lens trembled slightly in her hand. The intercom chimed once more. Attention! Preparations are underway for immediate crew transition. Please remain seated. Nadia's breath caught. Crew transition. The words were final. This was real. She clutched the edge of a seat to steady herself. Her hands shook so violently she nearly dropped the tray she carried. Victor pounded the armrest with his fist. This is absurd. I will call the board myself. I will put an end to this farce. He fumbled for his phone. His face flushed red. But before he could unlock it, the screen flashed with a system-wide message. Access denied. His phone buzzed, then went dark. His eyes widened. What is this? He shouted. Who dares? Charlotte watched with cold calm. She had seen this before. Once the system was in motion, there was no escape. Marcus leaned back, folding his hands together. His breathing remained even. His silence spoke louder than Victor's rage. Nadia closed her eyes, her heart pounding. She realized then that she was no longer in control of anything. None of them were. The cabin, once a sanctuary of order, was being rewritten before their eyes. And in that silence, every passenger felt it. The unraveling had begun. The cabin lights dimmed slightly as the engines lowered their pitch. Passengers looked around nervously, their faces illuminated by the golden glow of first class. The air carried an unnatural heaviness, as though everyone sensed they were standing on the edge of something irreversible. The intercom chimed once more. The voice that followed was calm but sharp, carrying the authority of steel wrapped in velvet. Attention passengers. By direct order of the executive board, the current crew will be relieved of duty immediately. Please remain seated while the transition takes place. The words fell like thunder. Gaffs erupted across the cabin. A woman in 2C whispered, "Relieved of duty, all of them." The man beside her muttered, "Impossible. This has never happened before." Nadia Collins stood frozen near the galley, her face drained of color. Her hands trembled so violently that the tray she carried rattled. She set it down quickly before it slipped, pressing her palms against her thighs to steady them. She felt exposed, stripped bare before every eye. Victor Langford shot to his feet, his chair snapping backward against the wall. His voice roared over the stunned silence. "This is madness. You cannot remove an entire crew mid-flight. I demand to see the captain. I demand answers now." But the cockpit door remained closed. No reply came. Marcus Ellison in 4C sat still, hands folded loosely in his lap. His face remained calm, but his presence grew larger with every passing second. He did not need to move. The storm he had set in motion was moving toward them all. Charlotte Vance leaned back in 2D, her silver hair catching the cabin light. She observed with the sharpness of someone who had already read the next chapter. She knew Victor was finished. His rage was the noise of a crumbling empire, not the power of control. Sophia Tran's phone recorded every detail. Her heart raced, her hands barely steady, but she did not stop. She knew these images would one day leave this cabin and shake the outside world. She whispered to herself, "History is happening here." Victor pointed toward Marcus, his face red with fury. "It's him. He is behind this. Do you hear me? He thinks he can play games, but I will have him removed. I will call the board myself." He fumbled for his phone, but the screen blinked with the same message as before. Access denied. His eyes widened in shock. Then fury. "No, no one does this to me." Nadia flinched at his volume. Her breath came short. Guilt and fear crashing together in waves. She wanted to speak. to explain, to apologize to Marcus for what she had done. But her throat tightened, and no words emerged. The cabin door at the front opened with a hiss. Heads turned instantly. A group of new attendants entered, their uniforms immaculate, their posture sharp with authority. They moved with the precision of soldiers, their eyes scanning the cabin with calm control. Behind them, 2 new pilots followed, their insignia gleaming. At their head stood Sofia Marquez, tall and commanding. Her dark hair was tied neatly back, her voice steady as she spoke. "Thank you for your patience. By direct order of the board, this flight will continue under new leadership. The previous crew will disembark immediately." Gas rippled again. A man in 1C whispered, "Unbelievable. They are really replacing them." Victor's voice exploded. "This is outrageous. I will not allow it. I am a founding investor. You cannot override me. I own this airline." Sofia Marquez met his rage with unshaken calm. "I am sorry. Mr. Langford, this decision comes from the top. It is final." Her words landed like a gavel. The current crew hesitated, their faces pale. Nadia stood frozen, her chest tight, her knees weak. She looked at her colleagues, then at Marcus. Her eyes burned with regret. This was her failure. She had betrayed the truth, and now justice was unfolding before everyone. Victor pointed a trembling finger at Sofia. "You don't know who you are speaking to. Without me, this airline would not exist. You will regret this." Sofia's eyes did not waver. "Please return to your seat, sir." The passengers whispered louder now. A woman in 2C said, "He is losing control." The young man in 5A leaned forward, whispering, "This is what happens when arrogance collapses." Marcus remained still. He had not spoken, not raised his voice. Yet every eye turned toward him. They sensed he was at the center of this storm, even if they did not understand how. Charlotte Vance studied him carefully. His silence was no longer only composure. It was command. Nadia finally moved, her voice breaking as she whispered, "I am sorry." Her eyes glistened as she looked at Marcus, but he did not turn to her. He kept his gaze forward, calm and unbroken. Her apology dissolved into the thick air, unheard. Victor slammed his hand against the wall. "This is my cabin, my seat. No one takes that from me." But the cabin no longer believed him. The faces around him were no longer submissive. Some passengers frowned openly. Others shook their heads. The tide had turned. Sofia Marquez stepped closer. Her voice carried a new weight, firm but measured. "Mr. Langford, please sit down. This is not negotiable." For the first time, Victor's voice faltered. "You cannot do this to me." Sofia's gaze stayed locked. "Sir, it has already been done." Silence fell, the kind of silence that reshaped everything. Victor's chest rose and fell with heavy breaths. His arrogance cracked, replaced by desperation. He looked around, searching for allies, but none met his eyes. Passengers turned away or stared back with cold detachment. Even Nadia could not look at him. Marcus shifted slightly in his seat, tilting his head just enough to meet Victor's gaze. His eyes were steady, calm, unwavering. He said nothing. He did not need to. His silence carried more weight than 1,000 shouted words. Victor's lips trembled. For the first time, he seemed small. Charlotte leaned back, her eyes sharp. She thought to herself, "The confrontation has begun, and he has already lost." The cabin door opened again. 2 uniformed security officers stepped in, their boots clicking softly against the carpet. Their presence was enough to silence even Victor. Passengers exhaled as though they had been holding their breath for hours. The confrontation was here, and it was undeniable, and in the center of it all. Marcus Ellison sat in silence, calm as a stone in a storm, the weight of dignity pressing heavier than noise ever could. The two security officers stood at the entrance of the cabin like pillars of stone, their uniforms sharp, their posture unyielding. Their arrival sucked the air from the room, and for a moment even Victor Langford fell silent. Passengers straightened in their seats. The couple in 1C held their breath. The young entrepreneur in 5A leaned forward, eyes wide. The woman in 2C whispered, "This cannot be real." Yet it was. The shift in power was tangible, undeniable. Sophia Tran's phone trembled slightly in her hand as she recorded, her heart hammering. She whispered to herself, "This is history." Her companion pressed his lips tight, too nervous to stop her this time. Sofia Marquez, the new lead flight attendant, stepped forward with measured grace. Her voice was calm but decisive, a voice that left no room for negotiation. "Mr. Langford, by order of the board, you are required to comply. Please collect your belongings and vacate your seat." Victor's jaw tightened. He stood tall, his broad shoulders squared, trying to summon the aura of authority that had once bent entire boardrooms to his will. But now, his voice cracked when he spoke. "You cannot do this. I have poured millions into this airline. This seat is mine by right." Sophia's gaze never wavered. "This seat belongs to the passenger who holds the valid boarding pass. That is not you. Mr. Langford." Whispers surged through the cabin like a wave. A businessman in 2B murmured. Finally, someone said it. The woman beside him nodded firmly. Victor turned, his eyes darting desperately from passenger to passenger. "You know who I am. Tell them this is wrong." But no one responded. Faces turned away. Eyes avoided his. The silence of the cabin struck him harder than words. Nadia Collins stood frozen near the galley, her face pale, her hands shaking. She wanted to disappear. This was her doing, her mistake. She had crushed the pass, bowed to fear, and now stood as a silent accomplice in Victor's arrogance. Shame pressed on her chest like a weight she could not lift. Victor's voice rose again, tinged with desperation. "You cannot treat me this way. I will call the board myself. I will have every one of you fired." He raised his phone, but the screen blinked once more. Access denied. His face drained of color, his hand trembling. No, this cannot be." Charlotte Vance in 2D leaned forward, her eyes cold and sharp. She thought to herself, "This is the collapse. The louder he shouts, the smaller he becomes." Marcus Ellison finally moved. He rose from seat 4C, his movements unhurried, deliberate. The cabin hushed instantly. Every eye followed him as though the very air leaned in to listen. He walked forward slowly until he stood beside Victor in the aisle. The contrast was stark. Victor's face was flushed with rage, his breaths uneven, his fists clenched. Marcus stood tall, calm, his expression steady, his silence commanding. For a long moment, neither spoke. The tension was unbearable. Then Marcus's voice cut through the air, low and even. "Respect is not a privilege to be bought. Mr. Langford, it is a principle. And tonight, you have lost it." Gas fluttered through the cabin. The words were not loud, but they landed with the weight of a verdict. Victor's mouth opened, but no sound came out. His lips trembled, his eyes darting wildly. He looked at Marcus, then at the passengers, then at the officers. But no one came to his defense. The empire he thought unshakable had dissolved into silence. Sophia Marquez nodded toward the officers. Their voices rang firm and final. Mr. Langford, please step aside. We will escort you off this aircraft. Victor staggered back a step, his bravado crumbling. No, you will regret this. All of you. I will. His words broke, scattered into fragments of desperation. The officers stepped closer, their presence filling the space. Victor raised his hands instinctively, not in defiance, but in fear. His shoulders slumped as the truth pressed down on him. He was no longer untouchable. Passengers shifted, their gazes unrelenting. A few muttered under their breath. Serves him right. Finally, justice. Sophia Tran's phone captured every detail of Victor's trembling hands, Marcus's calm, the officer's firm grip. She whispered, "The world needs to see this." Nadia could not look away. Her chest ached with regret. She wanted to scream an apology to Marcus, to beg forgiveness, but her voice was locked inside her throat. She pressed her hands together tightly, her eyes wet with shame. The officers took Victor by the arms, not violently, but with authority. He jerked once, then stopped resisting. His steps dragged as they led him down the aisle. The champagne glass he had left behind still shimmered on the tray table, the bubbles rising in silence. No one touched it. As Victor reached the door, he turned once more, his voice breaking. "This is not the end. I will return. You will all regret this day." But his words fell into emptiness. No one responded. The cabin had already moved beyond him. The door hissed open. The officers guided him out, his frame shrinking as he disappeared into the jet bridge. The door shut behind him with a heavy finality. The silence that followed was different from before. It was not suffocating tension. It was release. The kind of silence that comes when a storm has passed, leaving the air clearer, sharper, new. Marcus stood in the aisle, tall and calm. Sophia Marcus turned toward him, her voice steady but softer now. "Mr. Ellison, please return to seat 1A. On behalf of the airline, we sincerely apologize for what you endured." The passengers held their breath as Marcus stepped forward. Each stride carried quiet weight. When he reached 1A, he paused, his eyes sweeping the cabin once. He lowered himself into the seat with deliberate calm. The leather seemed to embrace him, as though order had been restored. The cabin exhaled as one. Passengers sat straighter, some nodding subtly, others watching him with quiet admiration. The balance had shifted. Marcus opened his tablet, scrolling calmly through documents, as if nothing had happened. Yet everyone knew something had. Charlotte Vance allowed herself a faint smile. She thought, this was not merely a man reclaiming a seat. This was a statement, Sophia Tran whispered. He didn't even raise his voice, and he won. Nadia stood frozen, tears welling in her eyes. Her chest burned with shame, but also with awe. She had crushed the pass, but he had never crushed her spirit in return. He had simply endured, and in doing so, he had triumphed. The cabin was quiet now, but it was not the quiet of fear. It was the quiet of respect. And in that silence, Marcus Ellison sat in seat 1A, not as a passenger, but as a symbol of dignity reclaimed. The hiss of the closing door echoed through the cabin like the final note of a symphony. For a moment, the silence was absolute. No one shifted, no one spoke. The only sound was the low hum of the engines, steady and indifferent to the storm that had just passed. Victor Langford was gone. The man who had once dominated the space with arrogance and entitlement had been escorted out, leaving behind nothing but a half-empty champagne glass and the faint scent of his cologne. His absence was heavy, yet strangely liberating. The cabin itself seemed to breathe again. Marcus Ellison sat in seat 1A, his posture upright, his expression calm. He adjusted his glasses and tapped lightly on his tablet, scrolling through documents as though returning to business. Yet every passenger knew this was no ordinary business. His stillness carried weight. His silence spoke louder than Victor's rage ever had. The couple in 1C exchanged quiet glances. The woman whispered, "I cannot believe what we just saw." The man nodded slowly. "I can. People like Langford always think they own the world. But not tonight." In 2C, a middle-aged woman pressed her hand to her lips. Her eyes shone with something like relief. He never raised his voice. She murmured, "Not once." And still, he won. Sophia Tran sat in 3A, her phone resting in her lap. She had stopped recording, but the weight of the footage pressed on her like a responsibility. She whispered to her companion, "This will go viral. People need to see it. They need to see what dignity looks like." Her companion shook his head nervously. "You could get in trouble." Sophia met his eyes firmly. "Some things are worth the risk." Farther down, the young entrepreneur in 5A leaned back, exhaling heavily. He thought of all the boardrooms where he had bowed to arrogance, all the contracts lost to prejudice dressed as professionalism. Tonight, he had witnessed a new template: silence as power, composure as rebellion. Charlotte Vance in 2D sat perfectly still, her eyes fixed on Marcus. For years she had sparred with him in boardrooms, clashed over visions, philosophies, and strategy. But in this moment, she recognized something she had always known, yet never admitted. His silence was not weakness. It was command. It forced the world to move around him. She thought to herself, "Victor has been dethroned, but Marcus has not simply taken his place. He has shifted the meaning of power itself." Nadia Collins stood near the galley, her throat tight, her chest aching. She felt the weight of every gaze, even those that avoided her. Shame dug into her bones. She had betrayed the truth, chosen fear, crushed the boarding pass with her own hand. And yet, Marcus had never retaliated. He had never spoken a word against her. That mercy cut deeper than condemnation. She wanted to approach him, to apologize, to fall to her knees if necessary. But her legs refused to move. Her voice was a knot inside her throat. She could only stand, trembling, caught between guilt and awe. Sophia Marquez, the new lead flight attendant, moved with composed efficiency, instructing her team to take over service. Her voice was steady as she addressed the passengers. "Thank you for your patience. The remainder of this flight will continue without further interruption. Please relax and enjoy the service." But the passengers could not simply relax. The air was different now. The golden glow of first class no longer felt like empty luxury. It felt like a stage where a profound lesson had been performed. The businessman in 2B leaned forward, speaking softly. That man in 1A, he changed everything tonight. The woman beside him nodded. He reminded us that respect is not negotiable. Marcus remained quiet, scrolling on his tablet. But his presence pulled every thought in the cabin toward him. He was no longer just a passenger. He was a symbol, and everyone knew it. Sophia Tran stared at him with admiration. She whispered to herself, "He gave us all permission to believe again." Charlotte Vance raised her glass, not in toast, but in silent acknowledgement. She thought, "The game has changed. The era of men like Langford is over." Nadia finally gathered the courage to step forward. Her voice trembled as she spoke softly. "Mr. Ellison, I am sorry." The words barely carried across the aisle, but Marcus looked up, his eyes calm and steady. For a moment their gazes met. He did not speak. He only nodded once, a gesture of quiet acknowledgement. It was neither absolution nor condemnation. It was something heavier truth accepted. Nadia felt her knees weaken. Her eyes blurred with tears. That single nod was more than she deserved. Yet it freed her from the weight she carried. The passengers watched in silence. They felt the shift too. They saw the contrast between Marcus's quiet strength and Victor's hollow arrogance. They understood the unspoken message: dignity cannot be crushed, not even when a boarding pass is. The engines roared softly as the plane continued its journey, but the cabin remained hushed. Passengers sat straighter, their eyes brighter, as though they had all shared in a secret awakening. Marcus leaned back, his gaze drifting to the window. The night sky stretched wide and endless, city lights twinkling far below. He breathed deeply, his thoughts steady. This was not just his victory. It was a moment that belonged to everyone who had ever been told they did not belong. Sophia whispered into her phone's notes app, typing quickly. Dignity is not loud. It is silent. It is steady, and it always wins. Charlotte's eyes softened as she studied Marcus. She remembered the message he had sent her earlier. One word. Now. She realized that this was only the beginning. Nadia pressed a hand to her chest, whispering to herself, "Never again. I will never betray dignity again." The passengers slowly relaxed, though the air remained heavy with meaning. They sipped their drinks, adjusted their blankets, reopened books and magazines, but nothing returned to normal. Every action was tinged with the memory of what they had just witnessed. And at the center of it all sat Marcus Ellison, calm, silent, dignified. He did not demand the spotlight. The spotlight had found him. The cabin would never forget. The plane glided smoothly through the night sky, the steady hum of the engines filling the silence left in the wake of Victor Langford's removal. The first-class cabin had changed. The champagne glasses, the soft leather seats, the dim golden light no longer seemed like luxuries. They felt like witnesses. Passengers spoke in hushed tones, as though afraid to disturb the fragile calm. The couple in one seat leaned toward one another, their whispers filled with awe. The woman said, "We were here. We saw it with our own eyes." The man nodded, his voice low. "It will be remembered." Sophia Tran and Thrie held her phone tightly in her lap. The video she had captured was more than footage. It was evidence, a living document of dignity standing firm against arrogance. Her chest swelled with both excitement and responsibility. She whispered to herself, "This is going to change things." Her companion frowned. "You cannot just post it. Think of the consequences." Sophia met his eyes, her voice steady. "The world has to see. Otherwise, nothing changes." A few rows ahead. Charlotte Vance studied Marcus Ellison from seat 2D. He sat upright in 1A, posture calm, eyes steady as he gazed through the window at the endless sky. His composure fascinated her. She had known Marcus for years, clashed with him in negotiations, debated him in boardrooms. She knew his brilliance, his stubbornness, his integrity. But tonight she saw something different, something rare. He had transformed silence into power. Charlotte leaned slightly toward him. Her voice was low, meant only for his ears. "You have not changed. Marcus, you sit in silence until the entire world has no choice but to listen." Marcus turned his head, his eyes meeting hers. He allowed a faint smile. "And you, Charlotte, have not changed either." You move at the right moment, decisive, leaving no room for escape. Her lips curved, but her gaze remained sharp. What happened here tonight is only the beginning. Langford is not unique. There are many like him. The system is filled with them. Marcus nodded slowly. His expression remained calm, but his eyes carried fire. I know. We will not only reclaim seats, we will reclaim respect itself. Charlotte tilted her head, studying him. Are you ready for what comes next? Because it will not stop with Langford. The fight will grow larger, fiercer. Marcus drew a breath, his gaze returning to the dark sky beyond the glass. The fiercer it becomes, the more it needs someone steady in the silence. Not silence that bows its head, but silence that refuses to yield. Charlotte's lips softened into a true smile. She leaned back into her seat, her glass of water untouched on the tray. She knew then that their paths, no matter how divergent, would converge again when justice demanded it. Behind them, Sophia Tran quietly typed into her notes app, her words flowing quickly. This story is not just about a seat. It is about what happens when arrogance collapses and dignity stands tall. People will see. People will feel it. And once they do, they will never forget. Her companion sighed, sensing her determination. Then be ready for the storm when it spreads. Nadia Collins stood near the galley, her back pressed against the wall. She felt like an intruder in her own uniform. The applause of passengers that had not been given still echoed in her mind. Applause not for her, but for Marcus. Shame clawed at her chest. She thought of the sound of paper tearing in her hands, the moment she had crumpled his boarding pass. It had felt like survival then, a desperate attempt to appease power and avoid the storm. But now, standing in the aftermath, she realized she had not survived. She had been diminished. Her eyes welled with tears as she whispered to herself, "If I had chosen differently, I would not be standing here in shame." She wanted to approach Marcus again, to fall to her knees if necessary, to beg for forgiveness. But something in his calm gaze earlier had told her that forgiveness was not hers to demand. It was hers to earn, and that would take more than words. The cabin remained subdued. Some passengers closed their eyes, pretending to rest, though their thoughts still circled the storm they had witnessed. Others stared out the window, the reflection of Marcus's calm figure etched into their minds. Sophia Marquez, the new lead attendant, moved down the aisle. Her steps measured. She adjusted blankets, offered drinks, and restored order with practiced precision. But her eyes flicked often toward Marcus. She knew that this night was no ordinary shift, no ordinary flight. This was history, and she was part of it. Charlotte leaned forward again, her voice softer now, almost reflective. "You understand, Marcus, that silence is not always enough. Sometimes the world needs words." Marcus nodded once, and sometimes words weaken the truth. Tonight, silence was the only answer. Charlotte considered that, then inclined her head in acknowledgement. Sophia Tran pressed her phone to her chest, whispering, "The silence will speak when the world sees this." In 1C, the couple sat straighter. The woman touched her husband's hand and said, "He gave us all something tonight." Her husband nodded. "Yes, he showed us that dignity is not negotiable." Nadia closed her eyes, her hands clasped tightly. Her thoughts whispered, "Never again will I betray truth. Never again will I fear arrogance over dignity." The engines droned on. The sky stretched endlessly. And inside the cabin, a strange unity settled among strangers. They had all witnessed it. They had all felt the shift. and in the heart of it sat Marcus Ellison, calm, silent, immovable, a man who had turned humiliation into victory without raising his voice. Charlotte exhaled softly, her voice a quiet vow. "This is not the end, Marcus. This is the beginning." He did not answer. He did not need to. His silence carried more weight than any words could. The cabin would remember. The passengers would remember. And when Sophia Tran's video reached the world beyond these walls, everyone would remember. The night stretched endlessly beyond the aircraft windows. Clouds drifted below like dark oceans, while the faint shimmer of city lights appeared and vanished in the distance. The hum of the engines was steady, but inside the cabin every sound carried meaning. The clink of a glass, the rustle of a page, the sigh of a passenger. It was no longer the routine silence of luxury. It was the stillness of a place marked by history. Marcus Ellison sat in seat 1A, posture composed, eyes calm as he looked out into the sky. The golden light from the overhead lamp framed his profile, his silence commanding more attention than words ever could. He was not a man reveling in victory. He was a man carrying the weight of something larger than himself. The couple in 1C sat with their hands intertwined, their whispers soft. "We will never forget this," the woman said. Her husband nodded. "No one will. He has changed the way I think about power." In 2C, a businesswoman wrote rapidly in her journal, her words spilling across the page. She glanced often at Marcus, her pen scratching furiously, as though trying to capture the moment before it slipped away. Sophia Tran sat in 3A, her phone open in her lap. The recording glowed on the screen, frame after frame of arrogance collapsing and dignity rising in its place. She watched it in silence, her breath caught in her chest. She whispered, "The world needs to see this." Her companion shifted nervously. "Are you sure? Once you post it, there is no turning back." Sophia lifted her eyes, her voice firm. Truth never asked for permission. It asked to be seen. A few rows ahead, Charlotte Vance leaned forward, her elbows on her knees, her sharp eyes fixed on Marcus. She had seen him fight in boardrooms, negotiate impossible contracts, endure the subtle and not-so-subtle slights of those who underestimated him. Tonight she had seen him win without a single shout. She murmured under her breath, "You have become something more than a man. You are a testament." Nadia Collins stood near the galley, her back pressed against the wall, her hands twisted together, her eyes damp. She replayed every moment in her mind, the crumpled boarding pass, the hollow justification, the fear that had guided her hand. Shame seared her, but alongside it grew something else, a vow. She whispered softly so no one else could hear, "Never again. I will never choose fear over truth again." Sophia Marquez, the new lead attendant, moved with quiet authority, restoring order with subtle gestures. She adjusted seat belts, offered water, answered soft questions. Yet she too glanced often at Marcus, recognizing that her role tonight was not only to serve, but to witness. Charlotte finally leaned closer, speaking just above a whisper. "Marcus, do you realize what you have done?" He turned his head, his eyes steady. "I reclaimed what was already mine." She shook her head lightly. "No, you did more. You showed every person here that silence can be sharper than arrogance. You reminded them that respect is not a gift but a right." Marcus's lips curved slightly, though his gaze remained thoughtful. "Then let them remember. Let them carry it with them when they leave this plane." Sophia Tran tapped her screen. With a deep breath, she pressed upload. The video began to transfer. inch by inch, toward the network that waited on the ground. Her heart raced, but her resolve did not waver. "The world will know by morning," she whispered. Her companion closed his eyes, whispering back, "Then let it be." In 5A, the young entrepreneur typed a message into his phone, drafting notes he would later share with his colleagues. "Tonight I saw a man dismantle arrogance with silence. I saw composure win where shouting failed. This is the new standard." Nadia finally gathered the courage to step closer to Marcus. Her voice trembled. "Mr. Ellison, I know I failed you. I know I betrayed truth when I chose fear. I do not expect forgiveness, but I want you to know I will not make the same mistake again." Marcus turned to her, his eyes steady, his silence heavier than words. After a long moment, he gave a single nod. It was not absolution, but it was recognition. Nadia's breath caught, her shoulders shuddering as relief and sorrow mingled inside her. She stepped back quietly, her vow written in her own heart. The cabin settled. Some passengers closed their eyes, others sipped water, but none could fully return to ordinary life. Each of them carried the memory of the storm, the image of Victor dragged out, the quiet strength of Marcus seated in 1A. Charlotte leaned back, her voice soft, reflective. "This night will not remain in this cabin. It will ripple outward. It will touch the boardrooms, the offices, the cities. People will remember the man who did not need to shout to win." Marcus closed his eyes briefly, inhaling deeply. His voice was calm, resolute. Then let it begin. Outside, the plane cut through the night sky, a silver streak against the darkness. Inside, strangers shared a bond forged in silence, a collective understanding that they had witnessed more than an incident. They had witnessed a shift. Sophia Tron's phone buzzed lightly. The upload was complete. She stared at the screen, her hands trembling, her chest swelling with the enormity of it. "It is done," she whispered. Her companion squeezed her hand. "Then history begins tonight." The engines droned on, but the cabin seemed changed forever. Each passenger would disembark carrying a story not of champagne or leather seats, but of dignity, respect, and the collapse of false power. Marcus Ellison remained in 1A, his eyes steady on the horizon. He thought not of triumph, but of responsibility. He had reclaimed his seat, but more than that, he had shown what true order meant. The storm had passed, but the echoes of its lesson would outlive the flight itself. When the plane finally touched down hours later, every passenger would step off knowing they had witnessed something unforgettable. And when Sophia's video reached the world, millions more would see what they had seen, that silence, when anchored in truth, can dismantle even the loudest empire of arrogance. Marcus rested his hands lightly on his lap, his breathing steady. He closed his eyes for a moment, and in the darkness behind them, he saw not victory, but a future still waiting to be built. He whispered softly, more to himself than to anyone else, "This is not the end. This is the beginning." And in that moment, the cabin, the passengers, and perhaps even the sky itself seemed to listen. The engines may have carried that plane safely to its destination, but what happened inside first class will not fade with the closing of a cabin door. A boarding pass was crushed, yet dignity was not. An arrogant empire was silenced, yet composure spoke louder than any voice in the room. Marcus Ellison did not simply reclaim a seat. He reminded everyone that respect is not a privilege handed out by the powerful. It is the minimum owed to every human being. His silence became a mirror, forcing passengers, crew, and soon the world to face a painful truth. prejudice still hides in polished places. And as Victor Langford was escorted out, arrogance unraveling with every step, the cabin learned something it would never forget. Justice is not always loud. Sometimes it arrives quietly, like a storm hidden in still skies. Let this story linger in your heart. Let it remind you to honor dignity, to reject arrogance, to stand even in silence against injustice. Because change does not begin in boardrooms. Sometimes it begins in seat 1A. If this story moved you, please like, share, and subscribe. Stay with us for more stories that reveal truth, stir hearts, and call for justice.